From Washington, Crossfire. On the left, Mike Tinsley. On the right, Pat Buchannen. Tonight, sex, violence, and rock and roll. In the Crossfire, Missouri State Representative Jean Dixon. And in Los Angeles, rock musician Mojo Nixon.
Good evening. Welcome to Crossfire. It's 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Do you know what your child is listening to? It could be something like this from a rap group called 2 Live Crew. Me So Horny is just the title of this song. Most of the lyrics are too rude even for Crossfire. And the album it's on has sold more than 1 million copies in the past 6 months. 5 years ago, the record industry agreed to voluntary labeling of records with violent or lewd lyrics. But critics say voluntary labeling has not worked. They want laws requiring warning labels on records, or even laws forbidding the sale of records to teenagers. Is this prudence or censorship? Pat?
Mr. Nixon, I gather Mojo is not your baptismal name, so we'll just go with Mr. Nixon. 75, let me ask you a question, Mr. Nixon. 75 to 80%, I think, of American parents and people want warning labels on these kind of records that they feel are salacious or anti-Semitic or racist. What is wrong with practicing a little democracy and letting the warning labels be placed there?
Well, democracy might be interrupted by a little thing called the Constitution, a little thing called the First Amendment there, Pat. I think that parents have a responsibility to their children, not to other people's children.
All right. Well, look, there's no one violating the constitutional rights, I think, of this crowd that, what is it, Crew something or other, Michael, that wrote Me So Horny. They're allowed to say what they want, but what we have here is a product. Now, just like the FDA requires warning labels, you got warning labels on cigarette advertising. What is wrong with the state putting a warning label on a product like this, where Ice-T apparently has his own warning label? What is wrong with the state simply doing that?
I don't think the state's going to be able to define what is it they don't like. I mean, me and you may agree that some song that goes, I want to rape your mama is a very bad song, and we both agree. But at what point, at what point do you put the label on? Does the word fornication? I had a big problem with the word fornication in a song, which is in the Bible. I don't know where you draw the line.
Well, let me try to help you out, Mr. Nixon.
Try to help me out.
The Supreme Court has said that I think pornography and obscenity are not protected forms of speech, and so you leave it to the local community and the states in this country to make that determination and put the warning labels on. That's the way we've got it, a 50-state federal system. What is wrong with letting Missouri do one thing? New York City is obviously going to do another.
I was on the impression that the bill that Representative Dixon has is to ban the sales to those under minors, those under 18, not just to put the warning label on.
No,
is that true?
Excuse me, to be fair to Jean Dixon, as I understand her law, she only wants the warning label for now, she says. However, here is your attempt to define what you want to label in these rock lyrics. You want a label that says, this record contains one or more of the following: nudity, Satanism, suicide, sodomy, incest, bestiality, sadomasochism, adultery, murder, morbid violence, or any deviant sexual conduct in a violent context, use or illegal use of drugs or alcohol.
That's exactly right.
Now, does that mean if one lyric in one song on an album says, hey baby, let's take off our clothes, that means the whole album has got to be wrapped in opaque paper and got to contain this warning label?
What we're talking about here we're talking about a segment of music that is promoting illegal acts to our young people. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about lyrics, such as I have here before me, that are encouraging bestiality. That's sex with animals. Necrophilia, which is sex with the dead. We're talking about illegal acts.
Do you have any evidence that any teenager has ever listened to these albums and gone out and practiced sex with an animal or sex with a dead person?
Do you have any evidence that they haven't?
You're the one who wants the law, ma'am, not me.
Why is the evidence necessary? I think the evidence is that we have statistics today that show that our teenagers in America are in trouble. 92% of the 87 graduating high school class, out of 92% of them, 56% of them had begun drinking before graduation.
Do you think that's a larger percentage than before rock music was invented?
Yes, it is, as a matter of fact.
Let me have
Mr. Nixon back here. Let me ask you this, Mojo.
Put me back in here, Pat.
We're dragging you back in. There was about, I think last year, I think my numbers are correct, there are 600,000 attempted suicides among teenagers, only 1%, 6,000 were successful. These kids killed themselves. There are several cases, Mojo, where individuals spent all day long listening to this rock music, depressive rock music, some of it recommending suicide, and then the kids take their life. Now, you don't look like a guy who would promote that kind of thing. You look like a fella who would want a warning label on that and say, look, this is rotten stuff.
No. You're misreading my face there, Mr. Buchanan. I think that the parent and the teenager, I think we're talking about teenagers as if they're idiotic children who are innocent vessels to be filled. Teenagers are old enough to start making decisions for themselves. This is the land of the free, the home of the brave. You have to take responsibility for your actions. Teenage suicide has been going on since Romeo and Juliet. To say that rock music has something to do with it is to say that long hair had to do with something with the Beatles, to say that, you know, Elvis is promoting teenage sexuality or something in the 50s. You know, that appears to be funny to us now. But I think we're way off the mark here. I think parents have a responsibility when they bring children into the world to raise them to know right from wrong. Parents need... Yeah, and I don't...
Should people be forbidden, should teenagers be forbidden to see the movie, Miss Dixon, of Romeo and Juliet, which is extremely depressing and certainly romanticizes teenage suicide?
Let me tell you, though, we do not allow our children to attend R and X-rated movies. Are we talking about somebody here who would really want to mandate parental ignorance? All we're asking for is more information. We're not censoring speech. We're not saying he can't say it, he can't sell it. We're saying tell us what's in it before we buy it.
You have said you're not saying that yet, but that you might want to actually, if you had your way, would you ban the sale of these records that come in these categories that you don't like to teenagers?
Let me tell you this. Yeah. Do we want to promote these illegal acts to our children? You know, I am almost ashamed to sit here and tell you that I'm trying to work out something where the record industry can sell this filth and trash to our teens when it rightfully should be banned.
You would like to ban it.
I'm saying it rightfully should be.
Go ahead, Mojo.
Yes, I can't believe what I'm hearing. You know, Two Live Crew and these satanic, you know, heavy metal bands, as filthy as they may be, the people that have brought them to the public attention in America are women like Tipper Gore, like Miss Dixon's. Other people have brought them. No one would know about them. The marketplace, MTV, you know, the radio stations, they don't play them. The only way people know about them is by this crazy, you know, sticker banning stuff. Let the public decide what it wants to buy, what it doesn't want to buy. The same way the public decides who they elect and who they don't elect.
Okay, we'll be back with more on whether dirty lyrics on rock and roll record albums were what James Madison had in mind protecting when he wrote the First Amendment. Welcome back. There is no doubt about it. Rock and roll albums, Mom and Dad, are not what they were in the days of Elvis and Chuck Berry. Many are filthy by any common standard of decency. Some dabble in racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, and even Satanism. Now, do states have a right to have warning labels placed on these albums and to restrict their sale to minors? Here to debate the question are Representative Jean Dixon, state representative from Missouri, who's leading the battle in the Show Me State to get something done about these lyrics, and Mr. Nixon, Mr. Mojo Nixon, who's a rock musician out in California. Is just I've just caught his attention. Mr. Nixon, let me ask you this. You know and I know there are some of these lyrics which by your standards and certainly by mine are filthy. Some are anti-Semitic, some are racist, some are occult. Why doesn't your industry really condemn these people, clean up your own act, say, look, you garbage merchants, get out, we're interested in good music?
Because, as I said before, this is the land of the free. This is a land of democracy. You have the right to spew forth any vile, crazy thing you want, as long
Mr. Nixon,
as you aren't hurting other people.
All right, but look, I've conceded the point that you can make these kinds of statements under the First Amendment. What I want to know is what guys like Mojo Nixon, why you don't condemn that and say this is lousy stuff, folks oughtn't to buy it, and here's the good stuff in our industry, just like newspapers condemn rotten and salacious publications.
I would disagree with you that most of what you call rotten is rotten. I am not ashamed of the human body and the act of physical creation. I think this whole American prudery about sex is completely misplaced. We're completely missing the point here. The whole, saying that we don't want to talk about drugs and alcohol and caffeine and nicotine doesn't mean it's going to go away. We can't, I think there's an assumption here where we're assuming that innocent people are going to be filled up with bad ideas. I believe
let me give you an example. Let me give you an example. In the inner cities in Washington, D.C. and others now, more than half the black kids are born and raised in households with only one parent, with their mother. Mostly the fathers are gone. 60% in some places are illegitimate. Now, let me ask you, isn't there a problem when folks like you make millions and millions of dollars promoting the promiscuity among teenagers, which results in that kind of life for a lot of these kids?
I didn't say anything about promiscuity. I said that we do not need to be afraid of sex. We do not need to be banning sex or even warning people about sex. Sex is a natural function, just like eating, just like going to the bathroom, just like shouting and screaming here on the TV.
I think that we hit the bottom line here, and the bottom line is the almighty dollar, Pat. That's the whole thing. And are we willing to allow the record industry to sell our young people the future of America right down the tubes for what? In the name of freedom of speech?
Look,
can I say
go
something?
ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I think this idea that the record industry is making millions of dollars off of these bands is ludicrous. Two Live Crew is the only band of this ilk that you will be able to show that has made any money at all. All the other Satan bands, Rigor Mortis, whatever, they're just selling just a few little records. They don't get on TV. The marketplace is keeping them off radio, off the TV. I think
let me ask you one. That brings up something that Mojo raised before the break, which is that the only thing that is selling these albums, which is giving them tremendous publicity, is people like you insisting on warning labels. Warning label albums sell better than ones without warning labels. It's like a free ad. Aren't you falling right into the Brer Rabbit's, whatever it's called?
Absolutely not true.
Briar Patch.
In fact, I think that then if that's the case, why aren't they willing to slap a warning label on all of them if it's going to sell them? That's my question to the record industry. If that's going to make the buck like they say it is, why aren't they willing to put it on all of them?
Because they're afraid that this will be the first step, as you practically admitted it will be, to banning the sales completely.
No, we are talking about a certain segment of music here. 1%, maybe 5% of the music here.
It's less than that.
1% then.
Mojo, go ahead. I mean, is it 1%, 5%, what?
1%, and 1% is not millions of dollars. 1% is a tiny little bit. I mean, you're contradicting yourself here. I mean, either they're making millions of dollars or they're 1%, I think.
All right, if it's 1%, Mojo, why don't we get rid of the garbage? And then you guys will sell more records. We'll have none of this garbage floating out there, whether it's racist, anti-Semitic, sexist, whatever. And then you're back to rock and roll. Everybody will defend Chuck Berry.
Because I think that's what the Constitution's about. That's what freedom's about. That's what the First Amendment's about. I think parents have to make these decisions, not the record companies. The record companies are in the business to make money. Parents are in the business to raise children. If you teach your children what's right and what's wrong, they'll know.
Mojo, should not the government be on the side of parents rather than guys who are selling Satanism, promiscuity, and the rest of that garbage?
I think the government is, by the education system, the government is on the side of the parents trying to instill traditional values in children. But that doesn't mean the government needs to, what's next? Do we start putting labels on books, Do we start putting labels on TV shows,
Mojo, you know as well as I do, there have been some books this century, Mein Kampf comes to mind, which have done a lot of damage. Ideas can be as dangerous or more dangerous than tainted food.
Right,
we have FDA labels on food. What is wrong with labeling filthy ideas?
You'd put a label on Mein Kampf saying this is a filthy book, don't buy it?
Everybody that reviewed it put a label on it, sure.
And it did a lot of good, didn't it? We have to take another break. Excuse me, Mojo. We have to take another break. When we come back, I'm going to ask Representative Dixon to pass on some of the records I've got on my shelf at home. Representative Dixon, I have a record album at home that contains the lyric, "I'll have one more for my baby, one for my baby, and one more for the road." Now, that's Frank Sinatra. If I wanted to buy that album in Missouri under your law, I'd have to go into a store. It would be wrapped in plastic and it would be wrapped in opaque paper, and it clearly advocates drunken driving. And it would have a label on it talking about bestiality and all sorts of things that has nothing to do with. Isn't your attempt to define what you don't like inherently ridiculous? It would wipe out half the records on my shelf, which are pretty harmless, I assure you.
Absolutely not. We're talking about.
Well, tell me, would or would not your law apply to that song?
It depends on the cover up, because the opaque wrapping only determines, the cover only determines whether that is wrapped in opaque wrapping.
Okay, would it need the label? Would it need the label? No, just in a second. Would it require a label? Would it require your label about bestiality and all that because it talks about drunk driving?
If it requires it, then that's
you do that voodoo you do so well.
Alcohol,
I've got you under my skin.
Let's talk about what I'm talking about here. Let me just repeat these lyrics to you. Just lay there and relax, and as you reach your climax, I'll be reaching for my axe. With 5 easy slices, you're in 6 lovely pieces. Bodily dismemberment as passion increases.
How many copies?
He goes on to say, my passion running high, last I will decapitate your pretty little head. A masterpiece of blood and flesh lies twitching on my bed. It's revolting.
That's a revolting song.
Let me tell you something. If anybody came into my home, I am a mother of 5 children. If anyone came into my home and started telling my children, hey, commit suicide, it's glorious, do drugs, do alcohol, what do you think I'd do to them? I'd kick them out of my house. And that's what we ought to do. We ought to do that with this filthy, vile stuff that our kids are listening to, promoted by the record industry. But all we're asking for is truthfulness in advertising.
Mojo,
just tell us what's in it.
Mojo, your turn.
Two points. One, I say kick them out of your house. I would kick them out of my house. I have a son also. I play some crazy songs. I explain to him why they're funny, why they're crazy. I explain to him that because my mother was so uptight, you know, I'm still rebelling against sexual things. But the other big point is, who's going to decide? We're agreed that last song is crazy, but who's going to decide who gets the sticker? Who's going to make that decision? You know, are songs like Mac the Knife or Tom Dooley or his album of Romeo and... Are they going to get stickers
in my bill, Mojo, the burden lies on the producer, the manufacturers of this material. That's where it lies. They volunteered to do this before.
How can you? So what do? You're going to publish an album that says, "I'm hexed again, vexed again. Thank God I can be oversexed again." Cole Porter.
Let's get back to what we're talking about. We are talking about the 1%. We're talking about death music.
Here's the problem, Mrs. Dixon.
We're talking about death music.
Here is the problem. You have these horrible lyrics that you don't like. You put out a law that's going to apply to a lot of lyrics. That's the problem with all forms of censorship. You can always come up with a horrible example, but once you start censoring, you're going to censor a lot of things that are harmless.
Let me tell you, number one, you're talking about someone else's bill. This is not censorship. We are asking for a warning label, a label to be placed for more... No, wait, let me finish.
Will require this warning
what we're
label.
talking about is more information for parents so they can make a well-informed decision. Are you asking for mandated parental ignorance here? Is that what you're asking for?
Mojo, go ahead.
How are the parents going to make a decision when if you just have reference to one thing, if you have reference to teenage sexuality and it says on there bestiality? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. Who's going to decide what records get labels, who doesn't get labels? Do old records get labels?
I already answered that question.
You know, I think you, as a parent, need to sit down and see what your kids are doing. And
You're
as a parent,
right.
and as an American, you need to let other parents make their decisions.
You're absolutely right.
As an American,
that's exactly why, Mojo. You are absolutely right. And let me tell you, that's exactly why we're asking for information for parents to make
sit down and listen to the record. How long is it going to take to listen to the record? As Michael already said,
I can't understand. You seem to be arguing for less information, for not knowing, for ignorance. All they're asking
I'm arguing for the parents to use
what's in the package before the kid consumes it.
As me and Michael just pointed out, there's no way to do that. There's no way to put a stick. Every record, almost every record will have a sticker on it saying, this contains something that will offend somebody. That's what this country's all about.
Joe, you said that would just help sales.
If it's only on a few records, as it is right now. In the future, if it's on every record, that's balanced out. As you know, there's no way, you know, is Elvis sexual?
Thank you very kindly, Mojo Nixon. It's been good having you aboard.
I'm coming back sometime.
Representative Dixon, thanks for joining us. Michael and I will be back with final words in a moment on Cole Porter. Tomorrow night on Capitol Gang, the Gipper testifies under oath. Lee Iacocca tells Tokyo to step outside. And Cory Aquino stiffs our Secretary of Defense. At 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on CNN. Michael, how can you defend that filthy stuff?
How can I defend that filthy stuff? I don't defend it. I defend freedom of speech. They have the right to say it.
Well,
I'll fight to the death for their right to say it.
Well, we have asked, the lady has asked simply that you put a label and say there is garbage in this package, just like we do
As I
on
demonstrated,
pollutants.
her label would have to be applied to every single record in the shops. You can't start drawing these lines.
You know what the answer to that is, Michael? Is simple common sense. You and I would cut out would leave Cole Porter alone.
You and I would leave Cole Porter alone. That's fine. The record shop is sitting there thinking, I could take the risk and be courageous and not put a label on this, or I could worry about getting sued. So you conservatives are always talking about the power of litigation to screw up people's incentives. This is a classic example once you allow people to sue on stuff like this. From the left, I'm Mike Tinsley. Good night for Crossfire.
We ought to have a chilling effect on you. From the right, Pat Buchannen. Join us tomorrow night, Monday night for another edition of Crossfire.